This evening, women and youth had the opportunity to get answers to issues of concern to them. So it is my pleasure to ask Mr. Murphy David, member of the Guyana National Youth Council, followed by Dr. Dawn Stewart, convener of the Guyana Women Roundtable, to share the background to this evening's Candidate Issue Forum.
The Guyana National Youth Council, an organization headed mainly by youths, and in a nutshell, the collective voice of all youths. The council advocates for youth rights at all levels. It is created by youths for all youths. We are proud to say that the council have been getting tremendous support from NGOs, private entities, individuals, and other organizations, which includes Blue Caps, Habitat for Humanity Guyana, Morondoi Incorporated, SASOD, Splash, the Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association, the Guyanese Women Roundtable, University of Guyana Students Association, Youth Movement, Youth Media, among others. The council started the Vote Like a Boss campaign to remind youths of their rights and to have a say in determining the future and who leads us all. With a focus on youth education and why it is important that youth exercise their rights to an opinion as we gear up for the 2015 national and regional elections.
This issue forum is one of many tools by GWR to involve the women of Guyana in the process of civil engagement. It also gives the women the opportunity to have a first-hand discussion with the candidates of the 2015 election cycle themselves on the issues that you have said to us are extremely important to you. Therefore, I welcome you all and look forward to a fruitful exchange of information which will assist you in making informed decisions during this election process. I thank you.
As we move on in the program, I'd like to introduce to you the person who will be taking us through tonight's proceedings. He is Mr. Derwin Humphrey, is the Project Operations Manager at Morondoi Incorporated. He received his BA in International Relations as well as a post-grad diploma in Development Studies from the University of Guyana. He recently completed his MBA and he's also studied project leadership at Cornell University. He has extensive experience in professional training, particularly for volunteers, staff, and youth. He has participated in the 2013 and 2015 International Debate Best Practices Symposia in Washington, organized by the National Democratic Institute and the Commission on Presidential Debates, and represents Guyana on the Caribbean Regional Network for Debates. So please give a round of applause to the man I'll hand the proceedings to, Mr. Derwin Humphrey. Over to you, Derwin.
Tonight's forum is obviously not a debate, so the rules will differ slightly from a debate. This forum will more closely resemble a town hall format with the candidates seated. Questions will be asked by the moderator, yours truly, as well as members of the audience when invited. Please note that members of the audience will be randomly invited to ask questions and have not been pre-selected. Please note that members of the audience will be given a chance to ask questions at 2 microphones specifically placed. The microphone to the center in the aisle will be used for those who have questions on women's issues. The microphone to my left will be used for those who have questions on youth issues. Issues tonight will focus specifically in these 2 areas. In many cases, these issues will overlap. Members of the audience, you're encouraged to make your questions very brief and to the point. Now here are the rules. All mobile phones should either be switched off or placed on silent at this time. Each question will last a total of 3 minutes. 1 minute maximum to ask the question, and 2 minutes maximum for each candidate to answer. Please note that if candidates wish to share responses to the questions, this is welcome. However, the same time limit applies. Now, if I'm to ask a follow-up question, you have a maximum of 1 minute to respond. The time limit you will be given shortly for your opening statements will be a maximum of 3 minutes. Let me pause to explain what this highly technical piece of device that you see on the stage tonight is. This actually is very simple. It's a 3-light system, not exactly technical, but very effective. The 3 lights will guide our timing tonight. The red light, let me start with the green. The green light will illuminate when the candidate begins his or her response. The yellow light will illuminate when there's 30 seconds remaining. And the red light will illuminate when your time has concluded. Candidates will make closing statements for a maximum of 2 minutes each. Please note, ladies and gentlemen, that questions must pertain to issues. All candidates will be given an opportunity to respond. Questions have been vetted by an impartial team and have not been shared with the candidates beforehand. Duplicate or related questions have been combined. There will be no insulting, condescending, or insidious comments or questions by members of the audience. If this occurs, we will unfortunately ask you to leave. The audience will be asked to respectfully refrain from excessive exuberance, and that includes clapping, excessive clapping, cheering, booing, jeering, etc., for or against the candidate. The moderator's ruling is final in the distribution of questions. Now, these are the 5 areas that we will focus on tonight. And these areas were jointly chosen by the 2 organizations involved today: teenage pregnancy, job creation, healthcare reform, education reform, and violence against women and youth. Now, candidates, you are strongly encouraged to be as specific as possible when answering the questions. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, the candidates here tonight represent the APNU-AFC coalition. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome once again the presidential candidate of APNU-AFC, Brigadier David Granger.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Moderator, thank you for your introduction and announcing the brevity of my presentation. I'd like to congratulate the Guyana Women's Roundtable and the GNYC on mounting this very important event this evening. To be realistic, in examining women and youth issues, we need to look at several factors before we deal with the agenda which has been announced. To my mind, the most important is poverty. And without dealing with the question of poverty, we will not be able to realistically deal with some of the other issues which have been mentioned. I had the experience a few months ago of meeting in Maikoni a young mother of 14. She wasn't 14 years old. She had 14 children. And she could not afford to send them to school. So there's no point speaking about education, speaking about nutrition, speaking about other domestic problems unless you deal with the fact that there are many mothers who simply cannot afford to bring up their children, cannot afford to provide for what is required in the household. So poverty has to be at the basis of APNU-AFC's approach to dealing with issues affecting women and youth. The second issue is the lights going. The second issue is the issue of education. We have in this country, after 23 years of PPP government, about 600 dropouts every year from our primary and secondary schools. This is unsustainable. It means that many of the children who drop out of school cannot read, write, count, or spell properly. and it makes them unsuitable for future employment. And this creates, of course, a problem for job seeking. And of course, the next issue that I'd like to deal with is the fact that women and young people who are not properly educated or fully educated end up with the worst jobs. They're menial, they're the lowest paying, perhaps the hardest working, and perhaps the most difficult to get. So unemployment is chronic and endemic among school dropouts in all 10 regions of the country. And many women suffer most. Many of them are being sucked into positions as security guards, cleaners, domestics, and other low-paying jobs. The next issue I'd like to examine in dealing with youth and young and women is, of course, the problem of the cost of living. The taxation regime in this country is oppressive, particularly to single parents, to women who have to run households. And there is the red light. And when we come to deal with health, of course, we know the problems of maternal mortality, we know the problems of domestic violence, which impact most heavily on women and young girls. All of us must be astonished, disappointed, outraged to hear about another young woman's body being dragged up on the foreshore. And it means that this is not a health issue, this is a criminal issue, a security issue. So these are some of the concerns that I feel impact most on women and young people in Guyana. And unless we deal with them, unless we have a government after the 11th of May which deals with these issues, we will continue to have the type of society we have now, a very unsafe society, a very unhappy society, where many young people choose to commit suicide rather than face the future. Thank you.
Mrs. Hughes, if you prepared a statement, if so, please proceed to the microphone.
The position of women in our country is very important to my party, so I will take up the challenge. Our presidential candidate has given you an idea of some of the areas of concern, and I think what I can do is probably share with you some of the plans and the things that we would like to implement should we be elected into government. In the area of economic empowerment, we started off hearing about poverty, but to the alliance, to the coalition, economic empowerment is something that we need to do. And therefore, one of the things we want to focus on is putting in place an increase in tax credits for employers, and also for employers that can be encouraged to provide daycare facilities. So when it comes to the tax system, we're saying that, look, for large employers, we want to be able to put a facility where a woman does not have to worry about the care of her children. We've done some research and it shows that a lot of women actually at 3 o'clock are trying to work out how they're moving from their job to sneak out, to collect children, to drop them at a friend, an uncle, a cousin, a grandparent. So facilitating and encouraging tax credits for the establishment of daycare facilities, and also tax credits for employers, for individuals that are working with you, that you can get a rebate for the women that are employed with you. One of the areas we also want to look at is increasing microcredit financing. That is extremely important. We still have a very archaic banking facility. And I know that because just a couple of months ago, I went to the bank to borrow a very small amount of money. And it literally took me 3 months of providing all kinds of information, everything you could possibly imagine, just to get a loan. So our banking system is still not friendly enough and supportive enough to women. We want to remember that women in research data all across the world, it shows that women, when they borrow money for their own businesses, for enterprise, they have the highest repayment schedules. So we want to encourage. This is where we think that the diplomatic community, in terms of international organizations that can help to finance, and also locally putting more things in place at our banks. A very important area is the area of domestic violence. And it's sad that within the last couple of months, years I should say, very little has been done. We want to implement what you would call almost like a special victims unit at the police stations. We want to make sure that when a woman goes to report an incident of domestic violence, and also when she has been raped or any kind of situation of violence, there's a special unit funded with the requisite social workers, psychologists that can deal with the situation and can provide some solution. And I see the red light is on, so I must stop here.
What I will do is ask one person with a youth question, one person with a question about women's issues to take the microphone at this time, one person each, and I will begin with a question, and we will each alternate those questions. So I will ask the first question. Now, let me just let the audience know that these questions were received via email, the email address that was largely published in the press. And we've received quite a few questions. And as I said, we have merged those that were duplicate. Our first question says, "Good day, sir," and I'd like to say, "Madam. I live in the Cummingsburg area. We have lots of problems when the rain falls. We have 3 schools in the area, and one is in Thomas Street, very close to Church Street. What can we do about flooding in our city, especially to avoid children missing school, and also to ensure that the area is kept clean? Thanks, and I want to make my vote count for my area."
What can we do? We need to elect a government which will hold local government elections. We need to elect a government which respects the democratically elected municipal government, that is the Georgetown City Council, so that they can be properly funded and keep the drains clear and relieve flooding during periods of heavy rainfall. We need to elect a government which respects local democracy and does not obstruct the work of municipal and neighborhood councils. Throughout Guyana, we've had the present government uprooting democratically elected neighborhood democratic councils. So the problem of flooding is not a Georgetown problem. It's not a Cummingsburg problem. On the very day, I think last November when we had flooding in Georgetown, I was in Anna Regina, and Anna Regina market was being flooded. The Minister of Local Government was blaming the Mayor of Georgetown. I wonder how far the Mayor of Georgetown could extend his reach to flood Anna Regina market as well. There is a local government problem in this country, and it will not be solved until the PPP is removed.
Good evening, prospective presidential waiting in the aspect of the leader of the AFC coalition and Ms. Cathy Hughes, representative of the AFC. My name is Mr. Arnold Christiani. I'm an ex-captain of the Guyana Joint Services back in the 70s and 80s. And I've seen the excellence of people learning to cohabit and working in easy inconsistency, which is a British policy that I learned as I studied human relations back in those years. I was the quartermaster of the Guyana National Service, an organization that focused all its resources on the youths. The question, therefore, concerned with any aspect of neglect or inefficiency or combative behavior among women in relation to domestic violence or any other form of social unrest has got to do with how we bring about people to cohabit in a meaningful and positive way. So I would want to hear from both candidates what kind of program specifically or organization is intent to bring about that realization.
You want me to talk about cohabiting, huh? We have to look at the degeneration of political culture in our country. We have to look at the quality of education that children receive, building up values. Education is not just about reading and writing, it's also about the inculcation of values. And in our co-educational school system, we have to encourage respect and, well, self-esteem on the one hand, and also respect between boys and girls. And I think this is the basis of educating young people in family life. And the second thing, of course, is the existing families. Some people come from households which are themselves abusive. And I've spoken with many persons in the education system who report about instances of incest involving stepfathers or fathers. They report on other, what I would call aberrations. And if we are to deal with the question that you raised, the question of neglect and inefficiency, it is partly, of course, the responsibility of families and households, but I would say that in the churches, in the masjid, in the mandirs, and also in the education system, we need to inculcate those values. So once they're absent from the education system, once they're absent from the social system, once there are no institutions which reinforce the self-esteem of young women and the education of boys, we're going to find these problems when they are ready to lead families themselves. So I hope that answers your question, but I would go back to the education system and I'd ensure that the values are inculcated at primary and secondary level, especially when young men and women start to play mommy and daddy. That's when you need to ensure that the values of respect are taught to our young people.
I really would only like to add to the importance of putting it within the curriculum of the schools. And I know in my day, I don't want to date myself, but we certainly had things like moral education, and some of that is missing in schools today. So we have a challenge in that so many of in terms of our family structure, it keeps changing. We have a lot more single parent households, women heading households, and some of the support that should be there in terms of family values, we tend not to be instilling in the next generation. So I would like to see in the education system a more formal introduction of family values and the principles that will deal with this issue.
Given the current state of roads and other infrastructure in Guyana, how would you ensure taxpayers' dollars are wisely invested and high-quality work is delivered every time to the people of Guyana?
And both parties, both APNU and AFC, have advocated and struggled for Public Procurement Commission. We intend to strengthen the public service apparatus to enable it to inspect projects which are executed. We all know about the danger of election roads. They're built 1 month before the elections and they disappear 1 month after the elections. And we feel that the road infrastructure can continue to remain part of private enterprise, but they must be held to certain standards, certain engineering standards and inspections. And if people don't produce products or infrastructure of a certain standard, they won't be paid. So that's what we're in about. We're about public procurement, transparent procurement, and for the provision of services, and ensuring that there is proper inspection before things are signed off, or we won't end up with things like the fiber optic cable.
Okay, so one of the things that I think we will be much better at doing is establishing the priorities when it comes to the building of roads and infrastructure in Guyana. And many of you would know, if I asked you if you were ever in a traffic jam from the exit of the airport to just about 5 minutes drive to where there's that Indi Bihari sign. You know what I'm talking about? Right. Have any of you ever had a traffic jam from there? It's literally not more than, I would say, 600, maybe a mile and a half. We have spent 800 million of your taxpayers' dollars, of our money was spent making the exit of the airport just 2 miles down the road a four-lane highway. Now that is totally ridiculous, because if you look at the number of planes that land and the fact that most of us have never ever experienced a traffic jam in that area, why would you spend $800 million? And what is interesting is the next time you go to the airport, you will notice that it is still under construction. It's half completed. Those are the kinds of wastage that we will not tolerate.
Repeat with me, please. The voter's pledge card, and let's do this together. I am voting to get action on ending violence against women, education reform, ending teenage pregnancy, healthcare system reform, creating jobs. I therefore pledge to educate myself to the best of my ability on the issue concerning my community, region, and country. I pledge to vote on May 11, 2015, to advocate for peaceful, non-violent elections, to advocate for harmony and inclusiveness, to take 4 persons, let's say 4+ persons with me to vote, to share voting pledges with all my friends and family through all resources available to me. Yes, I pledge to vote on issues, not race, for the betterment of my country, Guyana. Give yourselves a round of applause. Great, so now we have Dr. Short, who will do the presentation of the candidate's pledge. We will now have the presentation of the candidate's pledge to Brigadier David Granger, the presidential candidate of the coalition. And let's just tell you what's on the pledge card. The pledge card says, my pledge to the women and youth of Guyana when elected within the first 6 months is to address the educational system by creating a clear vision, leadership, high standards, and commitment to equity, which must affect teaching and learning in the classroom and involving all stakeholders. I pledge to address violence against women, to address reforming of the healthcare system, to address teenage pregnancy, and to allocate resources, and to allocate the necessary resources to prevent teenage pregnancy, to prosecute persons accused of statutory rape, to prosecute parents who settle outside courts, to empower communities, adolescents, and young people to prevent and respond to early sexual activity in teenage pregnancy, and finally to incorporate sexual education in the educational framework. I pledge also to address job creation, to ensure greater and more fruitful collaboration between governments and the private sector to increase employment. And the candidate election pledge card says, yes, I pledge to work diligently to ensure I meet standards expected of me on issues listed for the betterment of our country, Guyana.